Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. We bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Chris Jennings.
Joining us on today's show is Will Kutscher, a content producer from Filson, a great partner of Ducks Unlimited. But Will, welcome to the DU Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, you know, when we got this recommendation to bring you on the show, the great people at Filson were like, hey, you should have Will on. He's just cool. He's got some great stories. And I'm like, what? He's just cool. You know, there's all kinds of cool people. But then I started looking at some of the things that you do, some of the things that you do for Filson, some of the things that you've done, you know, maybe prior to that. And I was like, yeah, this is going to be a cool conversation. So before we kind of roll into this, can you just explain what your role is with Filson as a content producer and really kind of how you got to that point?
So yeah, basically we're brand storytellers. We have an amazing job in the sense that we are not necessarily as focused on like the selling the gear, but more of the stories behind and putting the gear into context, you know? So with like the men and women that have these amazing passions and lifestyles and careers and just kind of showing the worlds in which the gear exists and thrives and really, you know, stands up to the job. It's pretty cool because, you know, we're not necessarily trying to check off the list as far as, you know, oh, we got to get this shot or get this shot, but it's more of kind of we're along for the ride and we get, you know, oftentimes embedded in different worlds and stories will evolve and, you know, take all sorts of shapes and sizes. And yeah, it's pretty special because you never really know what things going to evolve into or the kind of story that it's going to turn into.
Yeah, that's awesome. And kind of just explain, you know, the Filson Journal. I mean, we've kind of talked about that offline, some of these cool profiles and stories that you guys are putting together, but explain to our audience, you know, if they go to that Filson Journal online, like what should they expect to see?
Yeah, it's insane. We put together a pretty sizable amount of amazing stories. We got profiles, we have how-tos, we've got foods and like recipes, we've got field notes, all sorts of different categories, but like, you know, things just blend over from like left to right. We have, you know, focuses on, you know, various much like our signature materials and the different gear that, or, you know, kind of dive deep in gear side of things, but also just, you know, when we are in these different spaces and we are in these different places, we'll oftentimes kind of branch out, and these can stem from a conversation of, you know, let's say we're shooting a campaign and there's you know, someone sitting by the fire and he's, you know, prepping, you know, some, you know, moose in a certain way. And we're going to, okay, let's get the recipe for this because this is insane. And we'll try to put that on the journal. But like, you know, we've got profiles, like I said, how-tos, the amount of different things we find and people showing us, you know, different techniques and different ways to do different things. We're like, well, we got to put that in the how-tos, you know, we got to, yeah, it goes on, but it's a pretty cool resource. But you can get lost in it. It's amazing. It just doesn't end. We've got about coming up on 800 different stories on it, which is pretty insane. But oftentimes it kind of like stays with various campaigns and different kind of thematic approaches and shifts of, you know, seasonality and kind of where we are with the kind of the selling campaign, but it's also, you know, it goes all over the place. It's insane and a lot of fun.
Yeah, man, that sounds exciting. And I think, you know, what's interesting for me is you talk to people, or I guess it's online, Instagram, you know, everyone considers themselves a content producer now, but they're, I know, you know, you're laughing at that.
Yeah.
I laugh at it all the time too. But, you know, in reality, you know, really that they are, but there's just a few different ways to make your content so much better than everyone else's and create that, you know, that storytelling opportunity. What are some of the things that you guys do with the journal and with the profiles and the, you know, what is it that kind of you feel like sets your guys' content, you know, apart from everyone else's?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, you know, even myself, like, you know, being a content producer, I'm like, you know, what is there anything different from the rest of the people out there that are doing the same thing? And we're all storytellers, you know, and we're all, but we're lucky enough to, I mean, for me at least, like I feel very lucky to, you know, have so many different hobbies and passions and worlds that I'm kind of a bit of a master of none, all these different things, but I'm oftentimes like, I know just enough to potentially get me into a door into a different world. And it's really fun. You're being real. and you're getting out there and you're showcasing real activities, real people that haven't necessarily been showcased before, people that are off in the field doing their own thing, living their own world, in their own life, and they don't find you. They're not searching for fame and glory or anything like that, but you are showcasing these people that have these passions and these skills and these whether it be a trade or whatnot. You're in it, and it's very we are embedded, and we are oftentimes, and it's not just necessarily us doing this as well. It's like we work with so many different other content producers and creators and people that we have this vast network of people that are bringing us stories and basically saying, hey, do you guys want this? And that's how I started. I started by just being constantly I was working in marketing and shooting on the side just kind of for passion, and it was primarily it wasn't my photography skills by any means, or it was primarily the worlds that I was getting involved in was what kind of set me up with my career as a content producer, in the sense where I was just a weekend warrior kind of thing, or whenever I wasn't at the office, I would try to be throwing myself into kind of idiotically, you're like, I want to do that, like a friend of mine's about to go sailing down the coast from Seattle to San Francisco on a 80-foot tall ship, schooner from the 1930s. I'm like, yeah, me too. Let's do it. I'm going to take PTO and just do that, and kind of coming to Filson with some people I work with now, but coming to them being like, hey, do you guys want the story? And it was pretty cool, having a brand that's like, yes, we want the story. We want it as real as possible. Just go and I was photographing, but I'm also part of the crew. I've got watch. I'm on the bowsprit. Wrestling sails in the moonlight. Off the North Californian coast, and you're still trying to get the shots you can. But it's pretty special being a part of an organization now that they just drop the gear off and you put the gear on the people when it makes sense. And there's no styling happening. It's kind of like, and oftentimes we'll get slapped in the hand if we come back and, oh, this jacket's not available yet, that kind of thing. But it's definitely one of those things where the crew or the cast or whoever the talent, we say, it's like, pick your gear, pick what you want to wear, make, even go through our catalogs and our items and figure out what makes sense for your world. And we'll just capture it and we'll work around that. So it's pretty special being a part of that kind of authenticity.
Being authentic is probably number one priority. And you touched on it briefly, and I'll just go back. It's funny, kind of looking at the profiles that you guys have done, and then in comparison to how the perception of people online and things like that, like you mentioned, like these are not people who are looking to become like a star. These are just people who are out doing cool stuff. And, I would imagine most of these people like probably don't even have an Instagram account or don't, they're not out there like trying to be Insta famous or anything. They're literally just out there doing such cool things that someone wants to document what they do.
It's pretty special. Yeah, it's pretty special when you can see, help them tell their story. You're just, you're along, for the ride and you're documenting as much as possible. But it's pretty wild when you have these people that are kind of like, they don't think anything about what they're doing is notable or exciting or unique in any way. And then you kind of show them the imagery and the story that comes from them. And they're like, wow. I look pretty cool. And you're like, yeah, it's fun, right? It's like, this is what you do. It's, kind of glorifying it in a sense. Like this is what you do is pretty badass.
While we're on that point, just pick out one, like what was one really awesome trip that you went on other than the sailing down the California coast, which sounds pretty awesome. What was one story that really, really stands out to you as you were just like, wow, that was some of the coolest things I've ever done? There
was one, and oftentimes these kind of stories will come from just, a drink. You're having a drink at a bar and you're just chatting with people, or a friend of a friend. And I got invited on to document a subsistence hunt up north of the Brooks Range. It's outside the gates of the Arctic National, I think it's Preserve or Wildlife. It was just insane because pretty much you're taking the Dawson Highway, the ice road, all the way up there, and it's a 6-hour drive from Fairbanks. You're driving up this, and it was the winter time when the caribou are making their migration, and you're just you're trying to stay out of the way of these massive trucks that are going up to Prudhoe Bay to supply the operations up there. But the road's actually safer in the winter because they have these trucks that come along and fill up the potholes full of ice. They basically have water trucks that just like maintain the roads. They're not as bumpy. So the winter is actually like it was insane just to be up there in that experience, but to be going through the Brooks Range. But the thing is, you can't use motorized vehicles off the Dalton Highway for like 4 miles. So we had to, and you can't use any kind of rifle in that area too, because the pipeline goes through there as well. So we had to take skis out and basically use touring skis, and we're pulling behind us our sleds full of gear. And for 4 days we were out there, and we're basically following the track of caribou, but we're living out of our sleds. And that was a huge wake up call for me too. It's like, as far as the gear in the field and how you are trying to capture what's going on, but also you're trying to protect your gear and also keep yourself alive, because you're dealing with minus 30 degrees and you're sweating and you're layering down, but the sweat is freezing on you, and your legs are seasoning up. You're like, oh no, I should have gone to the gym a lot more before this, because these guys are still going, and I don't want to be the factor of of us calling this trip off. But you have to stay. You're trying to stay in shape. You're trying to keep drinking water, but you've got to stop, and you've got to use your fuel to heat the water, but you've also got to keep your water on your body underneath your jackets. So it was amazing. I mean, we were unsuccessful, but totally worth it for that pursuit and that trip. And I got some amazing photography from that, being in that stark, dramatic, epic landscape. It was pretty insane.
Yeah, man, that sounds intense. So you kind of knew what you were getting into before you went up there? I mean, like you got yourself in pretty good shape.
Of just you got to. The more you know, the more you don't know. But it's also like there's plenty of things where I'm like, well, that was great and I survived, but I wouldn't do that again. And if I had known what it was going to be like, I don't know if I would be like bold enough to do it. So you got to be a little bit stupid, in the sense where you got to just like, all right, I'm just going to go for it, not knowing enough, and then we'll figure it out as it happens. But as I've gotten older, I've realized like, okay, there's ways to really mitigate like the factors that are the danger factors. But yeah, it was insane, absolutely insane.
And we've had several different professional photographers on, and I've done shows with them on anything from shooting images of their dogs, like how to improve that, things like that some people, amateurs, really have issues with, on occasion, lighting, things like that. But from these extreme temperatures, I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking, like, what kind of gear are you using to protect your camera gear?
Yeah, it's. I mean, to be honest, I'm learning so much from so many different amazing photographers that are in that space all the time, and every time I go up there, I take more and more away from it. But I was amazed that, I normally shoot with a system that isn't really designed for that kind of cold. So I was trying to primarily protect, my batteries, because they just drain in that kind of cold. But also, you don't want to have your lenses you don't want to expose your lenses to too much, because then you get they fog up on the inside. So even when you're going from inside of tent to outside of tent, you want to keep your gear, at least your Pelican case or whatever you have outside your tent, other than your batteries. You pretty much wearing a vest full of batteries the entire time when you're up there. But as far as your gears, keep that outside. And we actually had a Fox up in this last campaign where it was taking all the highest priced gear. I don't know. I just had a knack for I'm going to get the most expensive gimbal I can find and try to run away with it. This little red Fox. It was pretty funny. We're like, how do you know how expensive the gear is, and why are you trying to run away with the most expensive stuff? But yeah, all I can say is, keep your lenses as cold as the environment you're intending to shoot. And keep your battery packs on you. But it's also amazing, my camera in those conditions. I know there's been a lot of new cameras have come out that can handle that. I know I've got a few in mind, but I also know that for me, I always keep an analog as well. I keep a K1000. It's an old Pentax, and I kind of learned to shoot with that. And it's this little M1 Grand of cameras. I mean, this thing doesn't stop. It's 35 mil, and it's just, my camera, my proper camera, my digital camera didn't know if it was on or off. I had to pull the batteries out of it so it would turn itself off, because it was just so cold that, the sensors start just freaking out. But this little this old 1970s camera was just, it's tried and true, just taking pictures of left and right. And it was one of those kind of cool experiences where I didn't know what it was going to look like until I got back, and then developing, and you're amazed to kind of see what the cold will do to the film, but also get that beautiful grain. And it's just fun to kind of play with analog a little more and kind of get back to the craft. But to be honest, I'm still learning so much in the digital space, but also I'm kind of in between all these different worlds, and there are people that really, really know what they're talking about. And I'm like, I jokingly say like, oh, just spray and pray, like I take enough pictures and there's going to be something good in there. And especially when you're in kind of an epic, conditions where, I worked commercially on an Alaskan fishing boat for 5 seasons up in the Bay. And that's like one of these projects that kind of got me in the door with Filson. It's like, you've got walls of water coming and you have a camera in the side of your Grundens and and you just whip it out and you're just clack, 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 clack as much as you can and put it away before this wall of water hits. But it's like, don't bring too much gear that can get destroyed, especially if you're in those situations where it's like, you're going to be in the thick of it. Then the classic quote is like, the best camera is the one you have. It's like, iPhones, we've got some amazing shots from iPhones because of what was happening compared to the quality.
Even some of the guys who shoot, even for Ducks Unlimited magazine, I had that conversation with that photographer about iPhones. He's like, oh, dude, he's like, I love them. He's like, I absolutely love it. He's like, it's fantastic because I'm doing 20 other things here. And he's like, all of a sudden something moves over to this side. And he's like, I can just snap a couple quick photos or shoot a little video to a company. That's funny. Most of our audience, I guarantee, or most people, let's just say most people out there who are shooting as content producers now probably never shot analog and never had to deal with film. I'm of the age where I actually did when I was younger. But I was also very excited when everything went digital because I even it's difficult to do, but even back in those days, I was a spray and pray guy, and that was a lot harder to do with film. Because now I can now I can take 500 photos and I look down and be like, oh man, I didn't get anything good, and then I can keep shooting. Where then it's like, oh man, that you can't take that approach. You really have to know what you're doing.
It makes you take a breath, take a pause, and really kind of focus on what you're doing. And like I said, I'm by no means a master of it, but it's one of that little, that K1000. It's a learner camera, and that's what my dad taught me with that. And we had a darkroom in the basement, and he taught me like how to, blindfold us. We're rolling film down there, like trying to get it right to develop these black and white shots. But it's a lot of fun, and the more like I said, the more you know, the more you don't know, and it's just been a really fun process to try to absorb as much you can from fellow photographers, but also the people in these worlds that are living this lifestyle, and like this is their normality, and like kind of returning to those organics, the fibers, and I've recently got a beaver hat for every time I'm up there, and people were like laughing at me because they're like, you look insane, but then you jump on a snowmobile and they're like, I wish I had that.
I wish I had that beaver hat on right now.
It's a learning curve. It's a total learning process.
No, that's cool. Do you find yourself shooting 50-50 videos and photos, or what's your ratio there?
I've only recently kind of gotten back into video. To be honest, like I said, learning a lot about that. But a lot of the kind of videos we're shooting are kind of like the B-roll side of things, just to kind of create a tonal, environmental, vibe that can go along to kind of showcase and to kind of give an emotion of the world we're in. So it's like, we just did one for, we were up outside of Kotzebue, photographing muskox in the hills, in the tundra, just next to the sea ice out there. And we were just shooting with our iPhones half the time, and there's some, I've got some drone shots of this or that I kind of spliced in, but it's just this 1 minute kind of just visceral, tonal feel to it with just some music, and just to kind of say, by the way, this is the world we're in. But to be honest, I'm not a videographer, and I enjoy putting some footage together to kind of make stories. But it's so much learning going on constantly.
Yeah, I think everyone is kind of in that. Even some of the professional guys that I work with, they had always been just stills, and then as everything kind of just media in general kind of morphed over the course of the last 15 years, a lot of these guys are shooting some pretty awesome video out there now. It's pretty cool.
That's king. That's there's a huge demand for that. There is, and I know we're definitely dealing with that from we're trying to source as much as we can, because that's what is, at the end of the day, we're creating content for people to to digest and to engage with, and you want that motion, because people respond to that much better. You have a second chance to stop them in their tracks, to say engage, and oftentimes motion is what does it.
Several of these stories that you've referenced have all been, you're going north, you're going up to the Arctic, in Alaska. Is that like a preference for you, or do you spend a lot of time in the South, or I mean, or is that a kind of a Filson direction? I mean, it's hard to show off a heavy tin cloth jacket in South Mississippi because it's pretty much hot.
It's funny. It's funny because oftentimes these are the worlds I just have more connection up there with the more time I spend up there, but it's also incredibly addicting. Just the Arctic and those just exposed, beautiful, dramatic landscapes and just the men and women and the animals that can exist in that space, and to also to see it, and to see people adapting and people, changing with the times, and so it's very, it's definitely, it started with, my throughout college, going up there to commercial fish to make money, and then it kind of blossomed into all these different stories and these different connections. And the more you see in Alaska, you realize it's out there. And there's just these insane landscapes that are, whether it be any of the ranges up there or the tundra or the sea. Being on the sea ice is one of the coolest things I've ever been, as far as I've ever experienced. It's insane because you're standing on salt, this of course is freshwater, but you're standing on the sea, and those moments where you're just like, I'm on the moon, and you're also kind of living your Hoth dreams, as far as being a Star Wars fan myself. It's like, you're like, I'm in it, man. Where's my Tauntaun?
Yeah, this is it. Your Tauntaun will freeze up there.
Yeah.
No, that's really cool. It kind of just a crossover, and maybe this is just kind of dropping a little recommendation for you. We do have a lot of our scientists and some of our partners, and they do a lot of work up there on the tundra for snow geese and breeding waterfowl and white fronts. And have you ever been up there in spring?
I have not. Actually, sorry, I've only been up to around Dillingham in spring. So yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with the landscape, but yeah, I'd love to go up to any of those spots and see some of those migrations.
Yeah, I mean, they have massive breeding colonies up there of lesser snow geese and graders when you head out east and things like that. But I mean, that would kind of be a pretty cool story because some of these guys have been up there for 25, 30 years running research projects and on specific colonies. So you're maintaining that science as they go along with the research. It's pretty cool stuff. Let's go ahead and transition over to like the Filson gear. And I found it to be very interesting how you mentioned, and I noticed from a lot of the imagery that you guys have from these, people are not always wearing nothing but Filson in the images. And you mentioned that. And but how are you going about getting this Filson gear into some of these hard to reach places, or some of these people who are doing some of these just wild things? How does that whole process work for you? And then is there times where you're like, hey man, we have to do this hat, or like you said, are you just saying, hey, what would you wear?
Yeah, that's the beauty of the journal and just kind of like the content in general. It's like we want to show the reality, and that also finds its way massively into the campaigns and the kind of the more selling imagery. It's like, we're totally fine if we're not going to try to put something in something that wouldn't actually wear, and also put someone, take something off someone like, hey, you can't wear that piece of gear because that's a competitive of ours. It's like, no, we'll scrub that later. But it's also because this is real, because that's really fun dealing in a world where it's like we're trying to show as real of a situation as possible. And it's also, so you're basically, coming into their world. And, we don't use any models. And that's what's really fun too, is these are all real people. And some of them look really good. And I'm so sorry that happened. But it's like these are all experts or specialists in their field, or know the worlds that they are conveying or we're shooting. And it's really fun to just kind of say, great, what, especially for the content side of things, we talked to them beforehand if we're kind of getting the shoot, set up, and we say, hey, take a look through our catalog, take a look through online and find what gear, makes sense for what you do. And then we try to get it out to them as soon as possible. Try to get it, and sometimes it doesn't work out, but we'll try. In a perfect world, we can get if they demand tin cloth, like I was out with a range rider in Washington, looking for wolves, if they demand, they're like, I need tin cloth, because I'm in heavy brush half the time, and so we get that person tin cloth and, whatever they need and whatever they kind of want. And then we want them to use it. We want them to mess it up. We want them to be as real as possible. And majority of the people we work with oftentimes bring out something, some piece of Filson gear that, their grandfather passed down to them and whatnot. I've got that, I've got tin cloth and Mackinaws from my grandfather. And it's just like, it's really fun to, people have stories that come along with this, or, you have got these these battle scars on these jackets of like, oh, this is this one time this happened, and it's all stitched up and, we repaired it or something like that. And they've got a great story there. And so it's really fun just seeing the gear in the proper context of where it should be and where it should exist. And so, yeah, it's like each of these stories we're trying to be as unique and as real as possible to what we're portraying.
Yeah. And what would be like one Filson gear item that you would take on almost every trip that you go on? Like your signature, just for you personally. I know everybody kind of has their own thing. And Filson has so many cool products, but like what's one thing that you would take?
Yeah, I know it's amazing too, because like we're oftentimes we don't have like we're not the guys that have the stylists, we're not the guys that have like the big production entourage. It's more of like it's just one person. So it's like you're pretty much thinking about the fact that you'll be in a plane at some point, and that plane's going to have a capacity, a weight capacity. So to be honest, like I have gear kind of for every environment, and I will bring things that I've got. Footwear is pretty funny where it's like I've got snake boots for the South. I've got bunny boots for the high Arctic, these, extreme cold vapor boots, Mickey boots. And I've got, extra tufts for the wetlands and the back decks of boats. But it's like I find my tin cloth. I've got this basically this baseball cap that is just beaten and worn and beautiful. And it's just one of these things that I've lost them like time and time again. I go over the back deck of something, or they get whipped off when I'm, going too fast. It's just like, well, they're gone. They're in the sea, but I find them again, and I will, or get a new one, and they just patina with me, and they just are like have so many stories and so many amazing experiences under. We've all got that hat. We've all got that, or that item that we love, and everyone else is like kind of grimaces at it because it's kind of nasty. It's like, that's my hat. It's this tin cloth hat that I've worn for many years and had many different versions of it.
Yeah, the memories just ride along with it too. That's cool.
Exactly.
So, I followed up on a couple different things when I knew you were coming on the show, and I looked at you had done a little kind of a Q&A on another website. But they really got into some of the gear that you use. And I felt like it's a pretty good crossover. You were on Alaskan fishing boats. You are, going up north in cold weather. That's kind of a duck hunting mentality. You have to approach for cold and wet weather on a pretty regular basis. What are some of the things that you would, if someone says, hey, we're going, duck hunting, it's going to be 25 degrees in the morning, 40 degrees in the afternoon, but pouring down rain all day. We're going to be in a boat. How would you approach that? Yeah,
well, big thing, and I'm sure everyone kind of says this, but like layering is massive, and also just like the wool element is huge. We've got some pretty cool merino layers that I'm a big fan of. So it's like the ability to layer down or layer up in those situations. That's pretty important. So that wool underlayers are fantastic for that. But also Bomba socks. They're not one of our products, but I swear by them. And any Alaskan fisherman or anyone who wears extra tufts will tell you that's the only way to go. It's this tiny little, I don't know if you're familiar. Are you familiar with Bomba socks?
Only because I read this piece up that you did.
Yeah, it's like I figured them out, or figured out about them. My first season up in Dillingham, or up in the Bay, in Bristol Bay, and it was talk about a huge learning curve. You're just realizing all the stuff you need. And Bomba socks are one of these items that you just can't live without, because when you're in the back deck of a fishing boat for 20 hours a day, you're sitting in these rubber boots. It's like you get pretty much gonna get trench foot, because like the moisture's coming off you and it's staying in there. These Bomba socks are pretty much, they wick the moisture away from your feet. You can find them at most like hardware stores. They're not that expensive, really nondescript looking. These blue little socks, and they're
almost like a little anklet.
Sorry, what's that?
It's almost like a little ankle sock.
Yeah, these tiny little. They definitely have some you'd probably want a boot like half size bigger to fit them in there. And I normally do that just thinking about the Bomba socks. But you get 2 pair of these things, and you have one on, at any given time, and you swap them out, put them next to the fireplace, because they wick the moisture away from your foot, keep it on the outside of the sock. And then when you pull it out, you can transition to the next one. But like, it's just a total game changer. And just having dry feet, no matter where you are, what you're in, I'm imagining like the amount of rubber boots out there. It's like, or just waterproof boots in general, they still, your feet still kind of come out wet after you've been, in them all day. So Bomba socks are a massive, massive thing I recommend. And also just wool underlayers, you look out for cotton, obviously, as far as underlayers, because, that's something that is going to wick that, or it's going to keep that moisture on you and keep you cold, which is the big problem there. But then again, if you have like cotton in the form of like a tin cloth, like, well waxed tin cloth, that's also going to be a godsend as well there, to keep the water off you. It's just, my gear is constantly evolving and it's constantly changing with whatever biome I'm in, and it's really fun to learn from everyone in those spaces. And I'm sure, if I go duck hunting, someone will be like, you got to do this. And I'm like, yes, I do. This is amazing. This is the best thing ever now. So,
yeah. And you mentioned that you're more of an upland hunter, not really gotten into the duck hunting.
Yeah.
But I think this is a good opportunity. We could probably fix that. We have quite a bit of support out there, in your neck of the woods, and there's a lot of really great duck hunting there. I don't want to ruin it for everyone and say, but Washington is got some really fantastic waterfowling. We've had people on here from the Game and Fish Department out there, providing updates and habitat updates and things like that. And I've never been out there hunting myself, but it's really, really great place to waterfowl hunt. So we may have to get that. If there's any audience members listening out there, you can shoot us an email, dupodcast@ducks.org, and maybe offer to give up a seat in the boat for Will. Maybe just let him cut his teeth on some ducks here. It'd be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I love it. Absolutely love that. It's one of those things where it's like, it just hasn't crossed my path. I mean, I've plenty of friends that duck hunt. It's just one of those things where I'm, it just hasn't linked up quite yet, but I'd love to do it. But absolutely love us, like a lot of upland, and started over in the UK actually, with pheasant over there, and found my way back here with it, and just done a lot of grouse and pheasant and quail and all sorts out here. It's like, I'm just the kind of person where it's like, yeah, if people are saying, hey, Will, do you want to join? I'm like, 100%, let's do it. Especially 100%. With people that have dogs, because I can't tell you how many times I've just been blindly stomping through the forest, and that you're just not getting half of what you experience with dogs out there.
Yeah.
So it's, I find friends with dogs, it's like friends with boats, they're the best friends to have.
That's exactly right. Before we get you out of here, I just have a couple more questions. One, it sounds like you've been to just so many amazing different places and shooting this awesome content. What's one place that you're like, oh, I definitely want to go there. I want to shoot something there.
Oh man. I think I'm just like, cause I've been, there's plenty of amazing places throughout all of this, this country and in, North America in general. There are some spots out in Russia, like or even Mongolia. Mm-hmm. I think Mongolia would probably be one of the spots that just kind of sticking with that on the vein of just barren, beautiful, epic landscapes. I think that would be, and the amount of people out there doing amazing things, these traditional ways of subsistence and survival. It's just astounding, and I've got so much respect for those lifestyles, and I would absolutely just love to capture something like that. But it's amazing because you also stumble into different worlds where that idea of what's next can totally change just by a story at over a pint. It's pretty wild.
My last question for you before we get you out of here, what you do is pretty awesome. It's exciting, and it's something that a lot of people out there would like to do. What do you tell people like, yeah, man, I want to be a content producer for a brand, especially a brand like Filson? What would you tell a younger person who's maybe in college and like, hey, that's what I want to do. I want to travel around and tell these fantastic stories. What would you tell them?
Yeah, just immerse yourself in experiences. And the camera is an amazing tool in a sense where it's a bit of a key to so many different worlds. It allows you to peel back, a lot of these kind of subcultures and different, different worlds that are going on all the time around you. And you're able to come into these worlds, capture it, but also experience it fully. Don't just sit behind your lens. But just throw yourself into it if there are opportunities to get involved and to tell stories, or it can be something as simple as, down the road from you, someone doing something you find fascinating or interesting, going and capturing that and capturing their process and the way they're doing that. But also creating those relationships and maintaining those relationships, because that's a huge one. You don't want to just get in and get stuff and get out. It's like, no, you want to, it's amazing how filling it is to have this network and these people that you come to, really respect and love, that are not just contacts, they are, your friends and family. And so just like maintain your contacts and really, but also just throw yourself into many experiences as possible and keep on telling stories, but just like be vulnerable in the sense of like, it's okay not to know what you're doing, because it's amazing how many people would be happy to show you, and happy to kind of hold your hand through an experience that maybe you're not, an expert in, but you also realize that, don't get in the way of things, but try your best to be as authentic and to be part of that as much as possible, whatever you're trying to capture.
No, that's awesome, man. That's good advice. Everyone there can, anyone who's interested in doing something like you do, can really take that advice. And
I was just going to say, like, one big thing is just keep on doing it. There's a lot of people that try and they try to tell the same stories over and over again. And, as far as a content producer myself, like, I'm oftentimes, people pitch stories to me all the time, and I play a bit of air traffic controller with, copy coming in and imagery coming in from other different creatives. And it's like, if you have something that you're trying to, sell the story, it's like, make sure there's an angle, make sure there's something that has more meat on it. And, and you certainly definitely all get to a certain point in which we're telling more dynamic stories, but just try to tell stories that haven't been told before, and that's a huge one. It's something that I'm always looking for when people kind of come to us with, with a lead or a deck and say, like, what's the bite on this? What's the unique, special story hasn't been told 1,000 times before.
Cool. Sounds like I started that process about 15 minutes ago by pitching you on
did. I'm hooked, man. I'm hooked. Where is it?
Spring in the Arctic. Here we go.
Yeah. Right.
No, that's really cool. And man, I really appreciate you coming on here today and sharing your thoughts on gear and content production, which I think is such a hot topic right now, and something that our audience, even just waterfowlers in general, that's the cool part about what I do, is we kind of tell stories from a waterfowling perspective and conservation, and there's so many cool stories out there for us to tell that that's what we have to do as well, try and figure out what the unique aspect to it and things like that. So I think this is very eye-opening for me and our audience. I really appreciate it. We may have to get you back on here sometime soon, especially after we get you on that first duck hunt.
Amazing. Yeah. Beginners.
Yeah, man, this has been great, and I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
I'd like to thank my guest, Will Kutscher, the content producer for Filson. You can see some of his work at filson.com. Him joining us today was just fantastic. Really kind of gave us a glimpse of what he does and how Filson pulls these awesome stories together. I'd like to thank our producer, Chris Isaac, for doing a great job getting the podcast together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on the DU Podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.